of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have a roll call.
Mr. Capristo? Councilman Diver?
Here.
Mr. Francolino?
Here.
Mayor Mechanico?
Here.
Mr. American?
I'm here.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Chief Petrican absent. Mr. Tully?
Here.
Mrs. Eilenberger? Here. Mr. Hackett?
Here.
Chairman Russo Lisi?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, this meeting is being held pursuant to the provisions of the Open Public Meeting Law. Notice of this meeting was included in the list of meetings sent to the Co-Star and the Asbury Park Press, posted on the bulletin board and on the borough website. Under correspondence, we have a copy of the letter from Mr. McGill that was sent to the council concerning the B3 zone that we voted on the last time. I think there were 4 things that they wanted taken out. The next item is a memo from Borough Administrator concerning the B3 commercial zoning and the adoption of a revised zoning map.
Mr. Chairman, if I can
Sure.
start on that. The B3 zone ordinance was referred to the board for its review for consistency with the master plan. It's in its final proposed form, and I have looked at the master plan. Our master plan is from 1979. It's been reviewed in on 3 separate occasions. I think it was 86 and 96, and then again in 2008. When I refer to the original master plan, I find on page 23 a section regarding lot depth and development character in reference to the Route 71 corridor. And it pretty much is on point with what we're actually doing with this lot. We're converting what is a split commercial and residential lot into all commercial by making the residential portion in the rear commercial. Our master plan, page 23, it says, it's a little lengthy, but I think it's worth reading. It says the lots fronting on Route 71 are in the majority only.
Mr. McGill,
Could you speak into the microphone?
just 1 second. Could somebody close the doors back there?
Thank you.
If anybody has trouble hearing, let me know. I'm sorry, Mr.
It's
McGill.
okay, usually I'm loud enough to be heard, but this doesn't really work very well. But nonetheless, it says the lots fronting on Route 71 are in the majority only 150 feet in depth. This depth is nominal for the establishment of desirable businesses and offices with both reasonable setbacks from the highway, adequate parking, and appropriate landscaping. There may be instances where lots fronting on the side streets, and then in parentheses it says streets intersecting Route 71, may be able to be acquired and included in proposals for development of lots fronting on Route 71. Where this can occur, while simultaneously providing adequate protection for residential lots in the area, it is desirable to achieve this added depth for highway frontage development. At the same time, it is not desirable to encourage the development of these rear lots for non-residential uses except in conjunction with the Route 71 frontage lots. Therefore, the master plan will show a depth of non-residential use area along Route 71 consistent with requiring highway frontage. Where opportunities exist for increasing the depth of development as described above, however, zoning changes to accommodate the same will be deemed consistent with the master plan. So that's pretty much, in my opinion, on point as to what we're doing. When we look to see if an ordinance is consistent with the master plan, we don't necessarily look at whether we are in favor of it or not. We just look for consistency, and that's all we're doing right now. Now, granted, that ordinance, this board had a lot to do with the drafting of that ordinance, but nonetheless, I think that given this paragraph in our master plan, and not finding anything contrary to it in any of the re-examination reports, and in fact, the re-examination reports talk about the need to have, to promote the 71 corridor as a commercial corridor. I would think that the ordinance as presented is consistent with the master plan.
Thank you, Mr. McGill. If I remember correctly, too, I think one of the biggest concerns we had, too, were buffer zones. And if we had kept it a split zone, the buffer zones, we would be able to maintain them as well as we would if we were commercial. But,
As far as the existing residential lots are concerned, yes.
okay. This ordinance, now, I guess everybody had a chance. Did everybody get a copy of this ordinance? Does anybody have any questions or any discussion of this at this point?
Yeah, just in terms of lots 801, 9, and 10. How does it significant, Mr. McGill, if you could, does in your research, did you determine that there was a significant change to those lots?
I'm sorry, which ones are 801?
They're, I believe, at the northern end of this zone. The southern end of the zone is another question because there's an application before us concerning the southern end of that zone.
Is that the one bound by Pitney Drive?
Correct.
Yes.
Does- And what maybe Mr. May could answer on. My point is just to bring to clarification of what are we changing for those lots?
For those lots, essentially, we do not have a liquor license. I'd say St. Stephen's Greens, I believe, is changing due to this ordinance. And the other occupation is just a office and business, which is consistent with this plan.
Would you explain what you mean by that?
That's the, well, the first lot 801 is a engineer's office, I believe, on the first floor, and rental in the back. So it's basically commercial property now.
Okay.
Okay, and 9 and 10 are actually one lot. The county defines it as lot 10. Our map calls it 9 and 10. That's why we were, to be conservative, we called it 9 and 10 in our draft of ordinance. And it is consistent in the fact that we do have eating places as item 12. So St. Stephen's Green is an eating place. As far as the liquor license, I can't comment on, I believe we took out the opportunity to have liquor sales in the zone, so.
Like a liquor store, a package house.
Package shops. But I believe Mr. McGill probably explains better than I can that there's different classes of liquor licenses, so that would not affect this establishment, or may not affect this establishment.
Well, let's just take a look at it. If the roster of uses does not include retail sale of liquor or bar, or tavern, or restaurant, then the St. Stephen's use would become a permitted, pre-existing non-conforming use. So
Wouldn't affect them.
it wouldn't affect their ability to stay open or continue operation or sell, as long as the use stayed consistent. It would affect them if it ever was shut down, because then once that use is abandoned, it would be abandoned.
Could you please clarify that when you say shut down? What do you mean exactly?
Well, yeah, that's not a good term of art. Uses that are permitted that become non-conforming uses, because the zone changed, they're allowed to stay for as long as they operate. But if they close, and I'm not talking about closing because of licensing problems or something. If there's an intent to abandon the use, then that use would then, when the operation or the use of that property, when somebody else uses that property, they would no longer be able to use it as a bar if the prior owners abandon the use. Prior owners can sell, and as long as it's continuous and there's always an intent to use the establishment as a bar or a restaurant, I call it a bar, but we all know it's a restaurant with, that serves liquor, then that use,
They would be grandfathered in.
they're grandfathered in until they stop using it, in a simple term. And once they stop using it, then they can't use it again as that use.
But if they sold it and became a clothing store,
Well, then it's done.
that's considered abandoned. As long as they
Yeah.
sell it with the same use, then they
It
can.
has to be consistent use, in other words, no restaurateur has to take it over.
The other thing too is though, if they want to expand it in any
It
way,
becomes an expansion of a non-conforming use.
which means it doesn't come here anymore, it goes to the Board of Adjustment.
That's
because
correct.
It's a use variance.
What if it burnt down or something and they had to rebuild it?
Yeah, if it burnt down, then you have to look to our ordinances and the law and the destruction, both under the ordinances and the state law, destruction of the property would constitute an abandonment.
Our ordinance reads anything greater than 60%.
And if they wanted to continue, they'd have to go for a use variance before the board.
That's correct. They would have to come back and say the building burnt down, it's always been there, and make their case for a use variance at that time.
Telling you.
No, I'm just amazed at a place that has been there. In fact, the serving of liquor there predeceases the creation of this borough. And for the council, I think the council has done a disservice to that facility by not allowing them to continue what they've been doing for the last 75 years.
I agree.
I mean, I would recommend to the council that they don't do that. But that's just for,
All right. Well, in our recommendation, then, we'll have a motion to recommend something. Then if you want to put that restriction in and the rest of the board goes along.
I'm not sure I understand what your concern is.
my concern is that we're telling them that if they had the kind of accident that the old Mill Inn had 15 years ago, they have no longer a liquor license. And I mean, and in that case, it would depend on the members of the Board of Adjustment to allow them to do it. And that's something, they've been selling liquor there for close to 100 years. I mean, they literally that was a restaurant prior to this borough being formed. I mean, I think it would be a disservice to at least, particularly the residents who use it and the owners of the property. That's just my own.
What specifically is that lot, 801?
That's 9 and 10.
9 and 10.
Excuse me, Mr. Kelly, how long have the current owners been there?
As far as I know, it was there about 1922.
No, the current.
The current owners, I think they've been about 7 years.
So it hasn't been 75?
Well, it has been a bar,
Yeah.
The rest.
a restaurant for 75
I
years,
know,
for
I
more than that.
understand, it's been Eggerman's Tavern for years, but it's not, the current owner hasn't been there for years. That's not.
No, but the current, the facility has been there.
It's facility, I understand.
And I mean, he has not doesn't appear to have been either the previous owners or the current owners don't appear to be bad,
Like,
No.
they were.
George, can I ask a question? If they went to renovate the restaurant, that would not constitute abandonment.
Renovate the restaurant, abandonment? No.
I just want to, in other words, if after, say, 20 years, they renovate, I just want to be sure that we're
They did that
clarifying.
7 years ago, when they were closed for I think a year,
Mhm.
something like
I
that.
just wanna be
Maybe
sure.
even longer.
But the example of,
Reservations.
my example.
Your example is abandonment, if it burned down.
If, as the old mill in did, and it took the old mill in 2 years, all right, to, number one, get the financing and get back up.
Mhm.
That would be an abandonment, and then it would have to come back before the Board of Adjustment, and, you know, for a place that had been in existence for that many years as a restaurant. I think it would be unfair to, whether it's the past owners or the current owners or the future owners. That's,
Yeah, as far as redoing something, as long as they don't increase the size of the building, they're fine. If they increase it 10 square feet, then they've got to go
And
to
then
a
they
use
use
variance.
Is it
You
possible,
could,
is
I don't think you could expand that.
it feasible for the council to leave that particular spot as a B2 and change the rest to a B3? So that they have no problem if they should burn down or something? Or a tsunami hit and wash them out or whatever?
I don't know whether we can speak to the council.
For the council could.
I think the only thing I could say is that if this board feels that that lot should be excluded, then somebody should make a motion, and we'll see if it passes,
Well,
right? I mean, but
Their-
as far as
their parking lot-
anticipating what the council may do.
their parking lot is in B2,
B2.
right?
Right.
Sure,
So,
the whole thing is B2.
Right now it is, yes.
No, their whole property is what I'm saying.
right now,
current.
right, but
Yes.
we're, even in this ordinance, we're keeping their parking lot B2.
Yeah, because their parking lot's on the other side of Pittsburgh Drive.
Right.
Their main parking lot.
Oh, that's it.
So why don't we just
It would make sense for the
make
council.
their
to
lot
make
B2,
that
and then
particular
from their lot
spot.
north, south,
Yep.
be the new B3.
And what lots are they, Joe? 9 and 10?
9 and 10.
So, any other discussion about that?
Now, that would only be a recommendation, we don't have any authority
Right.
to do that.
Like-
Okay,
Yeah, I mean, we're just,
right, I just wanted to be clear.
And if I could just ask one more question. If we were to do that, say make that recommendation, would that constitute spot zoning?
no, because it's continuous.
Continuous in what
from
sense?
there-
It couldn't be spot zoning in reference to that property, because that
It's already
property is
B2.
B2, and you're just leaving it B2.
Okay,
And I don't think spot zoning applies to the
I
other,
just think it's important for the ordinance
because of
to
the
know
unique
that.
characteristics of it.
And I think it's B2 from that point forward.
It's B2
It
all
is.
along there, yeah.
So, if we took something in the middle, you know.
Right.
Then I, right, Mr. McGill, if we did something in the middle of it.
Well, no, I can't, everything is fact sensitive. I don't think spot zoning's an issue in this ordinance in any respect. I think probably carving the exception out for Eggman's,
St. Stephen's.
Sure, St.
St.
Stephen's.
Stephen's.
May make a bit of sense. It's a little bit different than the other properties in the sense that there isn't residential. I don't, Joe, there's no R component to that property, right?
Those property lines are.
Yeah, so-
Not split zone.
The other properties are all split zone, so they're not. So in that sense, that makes a bit of sense.
I just have one more question. I mean, in the B3 zone, eating places are permitted uses. Wouldn't that cover them?
Or liquor, or
Well,
restaurants.
we don't call it bar and restaurant. We call it bar and restaurant in the B2, and this we call eating establishments.
Okay.
Technically,
I just, I'm just trying to cover all the particulars.
Was it initially in there and then?
well, especially under packaged goods, I think that would allow the bar, with restaurants to have a bar in them. That's how, in my mind, I envisioned it, and it appears that that has been removed, the board of the that was overlooked.
Didn't seem to exclude it.
Now, I think we're so focused on what was gonna be proposed there, we realize what was.
The bigger concern was actually having like a packaged goods store, because I think the council felt that, there's already Wines Inn, which is a packaged goods store there. There's another packaged goods store south on 71. So there wasn't really a necessity to have that. But I don't think the council was trying to exclude St. Stephen's, and we took eating establishments to mean, to incorporate that.
Well, then the council, it really comes down to the council.
And packaged goods is not a bar.
Yeah, but the council is the one that gives liquor licenses, approves liquor licenses. So if they feel it's appropriate, they can control it that way.
They can control where licenses go. There's a limited number of licenses in town. We're not gonna expand those numbers by any stretch of the imagination unless the state legislature changes. That won't happen. But my point is that we have, I think, 5 liquor licenses in town, and they're all typically located, and there's no outstanding problem. Why impose a restriction on this one when it's not really necessary? I just don't see that. I don't see the logic behind imposing the restriction on this one liquor license.
I don't think we imposed it intentionally. I think it was an accident, if you want to call it that. It was included in the proposed B3 zone, and interpreting it the way you're interpreting it, why then we should recommend to the council that they exclude that particular property and leave that into B2 zone, which it already is. Their parking lot.
Joe, lots 9 and 10, does that include the parking lot north of the establishment?
No.
That's already in
B2 now.
It is B2 now, all right, so just, okay.
In reality, they may be able to, if they were ever denied to reopen, and we had made it B3, they could move across the street to their parking lot, which would still be B2, and build a new restaurant there and convert where
But
they are.
that again, you can't move that.
Well, you have to have permission with the license and stuff.
They would have to, again, come back to the
I
county.
understand that.
Anyone else at this point? Yeah, I know there are a lot of people in the audience that are here for B2. We generally don't have discussions. This is a situation where the council, who creates the ordinances and approves the ordinances and votes for the ordinance, send something to the planning board requesting that we take a look at it and to let them know whether we feel it goes along with the master plan. Not to make any judgments on it or anything else, just what are our recommendations. Here's the ordinance, review it, and tell us what if there are any problems or things that you'd like to add to it. And that's what we're doing at this point. But I hate to exclude people in the audience if somebody's here to say something. This isn't really the place to say it anyway. If you don't want like this B3 zone for some reason, it's the council that you should be dealing with, not us. Because we're simply reviewing this thing by law. When we make zoning changes, we're to review these things, give our input, look at the rest of the master plan, see if we feel it's conforming, and suggest to the council. And then the council then does what they want.
We looked at this mainly with the idea that we wanted to make as small an impact on the neighborhood as was possible. It's our belief that if you own a piece of mine, I can't speak for everybody, it's my belief that if you own a piece of property, you should be able to do something with it, besides pay taxes and insurance. We kicked this around for quite a while and came up with this B3 zone proposal. And we feel that it is the fairest thing for everybody concerned, and that is why we suggested it. If there is anything in this zone that you don't, in the list of permissible uses, if you object to, you should bring that before the council and explain your opinion. And it would be up to them if they want to send it back to us and ask us if we would recommend that they cancel that out. That's what's happened with 3 or 4 of the items. But what we want to do is to prevent what happened, and nothing against West Belmar, but what happened down the road, 1/4 mile north of this property, where they're right out on the sidewalk. They're attractive buildings, but they're right out on the sidewalk. And that's what we can have today. If somebody does this, that's where they can be. And if they make houses in the back, on this new ordinance, you got to have a 20-foot buffer, and there has to be trees and such, and any live trees that are salvageable are going to be left. If it goes to a building lots, they can put their houses 10 feet from that fence at Wickham Manor and cut down every tree that they want. And they don't have to put any buffer zone, any shrubbery, anything. Not only that, but then the town, when they dedicate the street, the town would be responsible for plowing the snow, collecting the garbage, and eventually maybe repairing or replacing the street, whatever. This way, if it's all light commercial, we don't have to do anything but supplies fire, first aid, and police. Whoever owns the property is responsible for the driveway, the parking, the drainage, everything, the garbage collection, everything. And the businesses we have suggested we feel are low impact. Most of them would be closed at 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon. And you would have your peace and your quiet, and there would be a buffer. If there was any noise, there would be a buffer. Plantings and stuff along the property lines. That was our goal. And if you have a problem with that, well, you'll have to take it before the council and try to get something else. But something's going to happen with this property. And the longer we kick this can around, the more chance of it happening.
It's also possible we could lose control of what happens if we don't.
Yeah. This way, the people have control over what goes in there. The other way, whoever owns it has control of what goes in there.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we came up with a list of specific businesses. And I think, again, the biggest thing was the buffer zone. The buffer now can be along the extremities of the property. If the residential was still there, and we had an application for that property.
For part of it, yeah.
The buffers would be moved into where the residential meets the business. And I think once Wickham Manor was built and extended that entire block, basically, it changed the zoning in that spot, in that you had landlocked single-family lots along there, and it just doesn't make sense anymore. Buffer should be between the residential and whatever else is going to be there. We can at least keep the current plantings that are there, the trees that are there, and everything else where they won't be clearing any of that, and have them even increase their buffer.
There are copies of the proposed B3 zone, the ordinance, available for you to pick up and read. And before you believe some story that somebody tells you, and tries to make, some people are trying to make a political issue out of this, read the ordinance, be familiar with it, go to the council. If you have a problem with any of the businesses in there, say so. And we can eliminate another one. We want what's best for the town of Spring Lake Heights and the residents in the area. That's what we want.
I just wanted to comment, in terms of, and as we're discussing here, The real purpose was to have control over what occurred in that area. Having that 20-foot buffer allows us to preserve trees in that area. I'm mostly concerned as you get up, as my colleague Mr. Tully mentioned before, as you get to the northern end, at the south end of that property, it's sort of narrow, but it widens out as you go further back north to Hampton Court, to the, I guess it would be the northeast corner of Wickham Manor. It's possible there to require, we can actually require another 10 feet of buffer if we want. Because you have a huge amount of property there, and that would be something that the planning board could ask for and actually get. It's, if you drive into Hampton Court, if you drive along Wickham Manor, and I've done both. I've driven through Wickham Manor, I've driven into Hampton Court and looked at it myself. I got out, I walked it. If we were to allow residential housing in that northern lot, the general character of Hampton Court as it exists today would be gone, because all of those trees would be gone. And those trees come right up against their property, right against Wickham Manor right there. Those trees provide a very nice border and a very nice shade capability as well. I think we should want to preserve them. It's about, in the end, it's about having control about what happens there. The minute you take that to a residential situation, you lose that control. The setbacks are 10 feet. We don't get to tell them what to plant there. They can strip it bare, and most likely they will. That's typically what home builders do, because they're looking to get, depending upon what sort of facility they're going to put up, they need the space. I mean, I've heard people talk about what was done up in West Belmar, Como, excuse me, and I've seen it. I drive past it every day. Those townhouses are right on the street. I don't think we'd want that. And outside of that, that property was stripped bare. You're starting out with, your basic 8-foot bare minimum tree that they can put in there and shrubs. We don't have to do that. We don't have to strip it bare. We can save some of these trees. We can keep shade, which helps people keep their air conditioning bills down in the summer. In the wintertime, they still get the better sun when the leaves are off, and so their heating bills don't go up. But especially in the summer for air conditioning expense, you need shade. It does help. So in terms of that, I think if you really look at the plan and sit down and look at the map of what we're talking about, you will see, I hope, that a great deal of thought went into this as to what could happen and what we could control. And I think that is the biggest thing for most of us here, was that we didn't want to lose control of this. Because the minute you lose control of it, everybody's stuck with the result. And you may not like it. And if we can have some sort of control over that, as Mr. Miller pointed out before, if you have residences in the back behind these businesses, well, we're going to be plowing private businesses' parking lots to get to the residents in the winter. Do we really want to be in that position? Now you're saying, well, maybe it doesn't snow that often. Well, we all remember a couple of years ago when it snowed like mad. I don't think we want to be in that position. It's dangerous. I wouldn't want my residents trapped behind a commercial zone that it took me longer to get to in case of an emergency. I think that's an issue. There are safety issues, there are environmental issues. The other thing I would point out in terms of residential, every time you put a building on the land, and especially in the density of residential, stormwater runoff becomes an issue. Now today, yes, you have to have dry wells and whatnot. But for example, in this past year, we've had several rainstorms where we've gotten 2 inches of rain in an hour, and Route 71 here was flooded. You could have a very similar situation in that area because we're not keeping the ground, we don't have enough ground to absorb. And in addition, I'm a big fan of stormwater management where we put the drainage under the parking lots, which we can do without harming the existing or surrounding environment. I think that's very important.
Right, can I make one more comment? I was just thinking, when Rich mentioned that we do have ordinances that state that all residents must face the street. And if you look at this lot, since the residents are in the back, they can't, so if either of these other properties was like to develop their property in the future, they would have to also create a street to get in there, which means we could be adding 3 additional streets to the town in order to get to the back of that property. Because
More driveway cuts.
more driveway cuts. So that's another big issue. And you have to really look at all of this and see the whole picture.
I got a question to Mr. May. These deep lots, there's two of them there. Half of them, or more than half of them, would be residential, wouldn't it? So somebody that owns that property could, if they put a longer driveway in and put a name on it, they could build a house back there. On those two lots, they could build two houses. In the back of them. Yep, because it looks to me, if that back property line of the business lots, those, what would be housing lots would be bigger in square footage than the business lots. If that line goes straight across that, what is it? Well, I don't see the numbers here, but anyway.
Well, essentially, the commercial zone pretty much hugs, well, I believe.
Sort of lines up with the back of St. Steve.
Yes, back to St. Steve.
Straight line, that's all of that, east of that line is commercial, B2, and west of that is residential, and you could go back there and build a house.
Acreage wise is probably greater than the commercial zone.
Yeah, yeah, that's what it looks like to me.
That's the corner.
Okay.
You might even squeeze two houses, I don't know, three houses. If you got together, got both lots.
And a street.
In the street.
Okay.
Don't forget a street.
So do we need to make any kind of motion?
All right, yeah, I was just going to, is there anybody that wants to make a comment?
I have a question. I just have a question
Sure.
for the board.
Name.
John Tangeman, 564 Atlantic Avenue. Presently, the Amascato family has an application before your board that was supposed to be heard tonight, but it looks like it may not be heard tonight. Is that correct? Okay. And there was a plan to develop, to have a couple of houses and some kind of commercial property in front of an office building.
Right.
Was that office building right on the sidewalk like it is in West Belmont?
Well, currently, right now,
Is that
in those zones, there's a 10-foot setback.
Right, so it is.
We're asking for,
Mr. Chairman,
but we really
can't
can't
discuss the
I can't discuss it
application.
because it hasn't been here.
By the way,
I was just wondering if presently there was a plan to build a building right on the sidewalk, as Mr. Miller described what could happen.
until they really come before us, we
Okay.
really shouldn't
Okay,
discuss
thank
it.
you.
10 feet's not an awful lot of room.
It was 30 foot on the
Yeah,
plan.
the plans, the current plans are there in Borough Hall if you wanted to look at them.
We have it.
Fred Manager, 61 Wickham Road. I was wondering if this is the place to consider what the setback for the building should be to the buffer.
That,
It
the
doesn't seem to
setback,
be defined either in the
the
buffer
building
zone.
to the buffer.
In other words, assume that the parking area is in front.
No, parking, number one change was
Parking.
setbacks 20 feet from the street. They have to put plantings in the front now.
Has to be grass.
All parking is in the rear.
Oh, that's defined?
Yes.
I see.
To push it back a little bit from the street and to put all the park, so we don't wind up with a strip mall that's, you know.
If you get the ordinance and read it, you will see
I
exactly what was proposed.
Thanks.
Yeah, that was setback parking in the rear and, yes.
Kathleen Crippen, 564 Atlantic Avenue. I did receive a copy of that plan, by the way, and that office building was 30 foot from the curb on the one that I saw. I had questions for Mr. McGill, though. In the master plan reexamination reports that occurred since 1978, and they are 86, 96, and 2008, there are statements and specific recommendations that seem to conflict that clause about the using the larger lots for office space. And in fact, the 86 report says the 1970 goal of large office users in portions of this zone has proved by time to be not immediately feasible. It then goes on each year to recommend a comprehensive land use study, and it does state that The business zone on Route 71 is a difficult area in which to control land use due to the extremely varied and intermixed uses presently in place. So this obviously was a situation that went on for at least 35 years since the 1978 report. But what I wanted to ask Mr. McGill is, if you take these specific recommendations and they conflict with that statement, how do you balance that out and say, you know, it said one thing in 1978, but then the subsequent reports seem to conflict that?
Yeah, I don't think that anything that you actually cited there actually conflicts with what I cited from the master plan. The re-examination reports, and I've read them, they pretty much confirm that the 71 corridors for business purposes, general statements. They make statements about offices. But the fact that it makes statements about offices doesn't preclude this type of zoning either. So I don't think the references to the offices or the office use in those re-examination actually deal with what we're dealing with, and that is residential properties attached to commercial frontages, and I think what I have read from the master plan is exactly on point and doesn't need any interpretation as to its meaning. So, you know, I understand your point. In every master plan and re-examination, there's a lot of things that are said, and that's a good thing. But on a whole, I think this zone still complies or is consistent with the master plan that's in existence right now.
Now, what about the recommendation that was made about zoning change opportunities to create a mixed-use zone should be reviewed? This zone could permit age-restricted and other types of housing, such as affordable housing and market-rate housing, as well as additional non-residential development.
Well, again, it's a suggestion. I mean, if that is something that we were looking to do, I would then say, yes, it's consistent with the master plan for that reason.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted that on the record.
Ms. Griffin, do you want to see buildings like we have down in Macomb right on the highway, or would you prefer they?
What's the
step back
current
and have-
setback, by the way? Joe, do you know what the current setback for commercial development is?
10 feet.
The 10? That one that's in the current plan that was submitted is 30.
We're extending that and making it mandatory that they have grass and plantings in the front to make it more attractive.
And that's wonderful, but then why doesn't the planning board make that recommendation to the council to do that all the way up and down the highway?
It's in the
there.
It's in the
It's
specs.
in there. If nobody
In
reads,
B2
if
zones,
No,
also in B1?
B3.
Oh.
nobody
wait,
reads
wait,
our
wait.
recommendations,
Let me call this to order. We're getting into a debate here. We shouldn't be getting into a debate. We were specifically asked to review this,
Yes.
okay? Not to consider the rest of Route 71 or anything else. This specific lot. We gave our recommendations. We've gone back and forth several times. They're now asking us whether they feel it specifically, does it conform to the master plan? We researched it, we feel it does. If the board votes on it positively, then it does, and then that's where we are. If you're concerned about the development of Route 71 and the ordinance that's being done, go to the council and argue it there. We never offered zoning changes here. We were asked to look
I
at it.
was asked by one of your members for an opinion, and that's the only reason I came up was to answer that, not to argue.
Well, zoning changes in it for other zones may may not make sense, or may make less sense than doing what we're doing in the B3 zone. But that's not under consideration. I think.
Right, I want to keep it, I wanted to
All right.
keep it specific, yeah.
One of your answers to the audience contained sort of a misleading statement, and I just want to clarify it. Parking lots are not allowed to front on Highway 71, but it doesn't require them to be in the back, but it imposes a restriction that the only place they can put parking lots in the back. But the ordinance only calls for no parking lots to front on Highway 71, with the assumption is that they'll have to be in the back.
Okay.
It's not a part of the ordinance,
I thought we had
Fred, when Fred asked the
specifically
question,
said.
he was, you gave him an inference that it said something, and it doesn't say that, it just imposes that rule.
Yeah, they're not allowed to front on 71.
All right. Yes, ma'am.
Sharon Zanto, Beverly Avenue. My first question is, I was wondering why the Moscato proposal is suddenly off the agenda?
It was strictly a mechanical thing. They didn't serve everybody that they were supposed to, so they couldn't come before us. There were some people that they were supposed to notify with certified mail, and they didn't. Otherwise, we'd be hearing them tonight. They were on the agenda.
Okay, and then back to the ordinance and the changes. Where do I get a copy of the ordinance with the changes? Because I just have the original one that was mailed out.
Janine can give you.
Oh, you're here?
Yeah.
Okay, and then my feeling about this is that the ordinance cannot be complete without design standards, specific design
It's
standards,
in the ordinance.
specific design standards for building and architecture.
I don't know whether you can give specific, unless it's.
We don't have that for any zone.
Well, it's just a suggestion that I think the ordinance would be more complete if you have something in mind for a town plan.
Well, again, that's the council.
Again, it's the
Well,
town
you
plan.
have a difficult time imposing architectural requirements in any event. Okay,
Well,
you can in redevelopments, but this is hard
No,
to redevelop.
generally, it has to be considered a redevelopment zone or a historic zone
Right.
or something like that. Otherwise, you can't tell them what type of
Well,
architect.
the Spring Lake bid is working on one, and I think it would be a good idea if this proposal goes through, that should be something that should be in the ordinance. Otherwise, you talk about control, anyone could come along and build whatever kind of crazy building they want to.
We don't have to approve it.
Well, wait a minute, I mean, people are allowed to build the buildings that they want to build as long as they meet the building code. And the setbacks and things of that nature. We're not really trying to design a development here, we're just creating a new zone. Somebody else is gonna design it, we're not designing it, as you would in a redevelopment situation.
And that's the reason for this additional setback. If
Okay,
somebody
to
built
me, in
something
my
that is
opinion,
quite
sir, with all due
attractive,
respect, that's only part of the whole picture. And I think if you want to do something good for the town, and you're talking about master plan, and I know it, trying to get a town center in here, you have to think about the whole and what it's going to look like. We don't even know what it's going to look like. And that's my suggestion. I just
We're not
want to put
trying-
it out there.
We're not trying to,
I was talking, I'm sorry, what did you say?
I said, nobody knows what it's gonna look like.
Yeah,
Until
that's the
somebody
problem.
presents a set of plans. And if you're specifically talking about the Moscatos, right across the street down by 7-Eleven, they built attractive buildings.
Oh, right, and parking lots in the front.
the issue, let's try to keep it confined. It asks for architecturals. Again, I would go to the council, if they think they can do it, they can, but I remember 5 or 6 years ago, we had a committee that was looking into certain things, and we were looking into architectural restrictions. And you couldn't do it unless it was a historic site or a redevelopment site, and none of which those things are. So it has to meet certain criteria, otherwise you're not allowed to do it. But I would address that with you. Okay. Do we have a motion?
I would move a motion that we recommend to the council that blocks 46.01 lot 9 and 46.01 lot 10 be excluded from this, the B3 zone, and be allowed to remain in the B2 zone. And move the ordinance in with that exception.
And that would be because of its long existence at that
Because of the
site.
long existent
And-
property.
And the fact that it doesn't include any residential component.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. And
That's
otherwise,
exactly what I was thinking.
Otherwise, we're going to find that the ordinance wouldn't be consistent with the master plan.
Master plan keeping it. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
So it's one vote, or are we doing two different votes?
One vote.
No, it's one.
One vote.
It's that it's keeping with the master plan and that those lots be excluded.
Okay. Just want to make sure.
And that, how do we put that we're recommending?
So just authorizing me to write a letter satisfying the statutory requirement that we record on the ordinance.
Please be clear.
George is very clear. Roll call, please.
Councilman Bieber,
Yes.
Mr. Francolino,
Yes.
Mayor Mechanical, Mr. American,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Tully,
Yes.
Mrs. Eilenberger,
Yes.
Mr. Hackett,
Yes.
Chairman Mitchell-Lisa.
Yes. All right, the next item on the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, this is a revisit of the curb and sidewalk
Right.
standards. We had reviewed this, and I was given some marching orders to take a look at it to see if we could reduce the fees associated with variances. Now, my understanding of what the board found, correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's the board's inclination to keep the ordinance as it is, requiring the implementation of the sidewalks and curbs for properties that are at new properties, new construction. However, we wanted to see if we could reduce the fees on this. And I took a look at this, and I was working with Joe a bit, and really, I wanted to come back because what happened when we look at reducing the fees, we're reducing the fees, the variance right now would probably cost $100 or maybe $250. And, I didn't know how much room the board wanted to, how much room did we have to reduce it? I mean, do you want to go to zero? I wrote an amendment that said $100, which is the bare minimum for anything that we do. When we looked at the ordinance, the main cost that involved the escrow. And the escrow goes to pay for the engineering fees,
And
the legal fees, and so you have a situation where, in my ordinance, my amendment, it says, that no deposit shall be necessary, no fee shall be owed by any applicant for professional services. Now, it says by any applicant for professional services, but we all know that professionals charge. And I can't speak for the zoning board attorney. He'll be the one that's actually, I can write this and it's no skin off my nose because actually the zoning board is going to have to deal with it. But, in all seriousness, you would end up with a situation where you would have either the fees coming out of the general budget, either as the legal budget or whatever general budget the boards have, and I understand their minimum, because it's not a lot of money going around, I understand that. Or you're going to have an application that doesn't have much review to it, either engineering or legal. So even keeping it at a bare minimum, if you keep it at a bare minimum, because the town doesn't want to pay for the fees, then you're perhaps not going to have the review that you should have. And if you just absolve the applicant from paying those fees, then the town's going to have to absorb them. So, and I guess if we put this ordinance in effect, everybody will be addressing this issue in their next contract. But, so I wrote this, and I had serious concerns about how you wanted to proceed with it. So I asked Janine if she would put this back on, so that you can let me know what you want to do, and we'll move forward.
Well, there's also, Mr. Delaney is also asking us to review this too.
Could I ask just one other question? George, if I thought when they presented a problem to this, it was simply about new construction and putting in curbs and sidewalks. And I thought one of the things we were going to try to do was limit or waive the fees just for someone who was dealing with curbs and sidewalks, not with that they would have to make 2 applications to the zoning board.
Right, if they came in, if they wanted to have other relief, then, if I'm understanding the situation, my ordinance only applies to coming in front of us for the sidewalks and curbs.
Right.
That's it.
With defining that by saying it is limited just to that issue and no other issues
Right, no other
on that,
issue.
on that
Right.
application.
Right.
And having, I thought it was the ability to waive the escrow fees, because what I assumed, was that the homeowner because that's who presented the problem,
Right.
the homeowner would be presenting that to the Board of Adjustment by themselves
Right.
and looking for relief, and if the relief was denied, then they'd have to go back and go through the process fee, complete process fee.
Well, the application's the application. You're gonna run into a problem. You're gonna run into a problem with res judicata if you come in just by yourself on a shoestring and you say, I wanna do my, I don't wanna put in my curbs and sidewalks for X, Y, and Z, and it's not prepared properly, or as well as it should be, and then come back for a second crack at the apple, you're gonna have
I
that
agree,
situation.
I don't disagree, but I just thought that we were trying to limit it to that.
I could knock it down to 0 rather than waive it, because you can't waive for one and not another. In the situations where, you could call it a waiver, but you could knock it down to 0 and just, it's $100 anyway, just knock it down to 0 and say if, as my amendment would, as it does, only in the circumstance where you're coming in for the sole relief from this ordinance, requiring sidewalks and curbs, then you would pay no fees. And that's fine, but, I don't know if the professionals would be very comfortable just sitting here and shooting, from the hip on the issues. So, you end up, probably what would happen is, they'd be doing the work and then we'd be looking to see how we get paid, and there would be a rub there, so.
So then,
If I recall correctly, I thought it was the board's preference that we also, this was just strictly sidewalk as well. I know the ordinance states sidewalk and curb, but we were, I thought it was my understanding that the board.
strictly the relief for sidewalks, curbs.
Sidewalk.
Yeah, you're right.
We didn't want to leave curb.
Yeah, right.
So just for clarification, I don't want to get mixed up, because
So we just so the board, I know we have a couple new members.
Well, that's what I was just about to chime in, that since I wasn't here for this looks like from 2012. So
Do it back to you, Gordon.
they were looking for relief from even having to put these in, but we're down to just not having fees?
Well, presently, if it's a subdivision of any sort, it comes before us. Sidewalks and curbs are well, there's an ordinance now that it becomes, by ordinance, they have to put them in. We can waive it as, in an application.
But it's actually a variance, because the ordinance.
But it would be
requires
considered a variance. They'd have to ask for a variance. But we can control two lot subdivisions onto 50 lot subdivisions, okay? We control that. This really comes down to, and the board at the time felt very strongly that we should have sidewalks and curbs in any development of 2 or more homes. The biggest problem comes in with the Board of Adjustment. What happens is somebody comes to Joe, they have a conforming house, they don't need any variances or anything. They build their house. Joe then turns around and says, you've got to put sidewalks and curbs in. And they say, well, nobody else has sidewalks.
On either
for
side.
clarity
On either
purposes,
side.
these people were told that from day one, and that's where, and unfortunately, there was an issue with their builder, and
I
that's,
saw
that's how this came to our attention.
We again should broaden our discussion to generalities as to the propriety of this for all lots, not just focus on how this came before us.
But really, we're still at the fact that if somebody goes to put an addition on the back of their house,
They don't need sidewalks,
They don't
because
need-
it says you have to replace, yeah, you have to replace your current structure, not add on to
It's
it.
a knockdown.
Or if you have a vacant lot and you build a structure. It's new construction of the primary residence, right?
now, but, so did we ever discuss the fact that you have a brand-new house built, they have a nice sidewalk in front of them, and no other new sidewalk is ever built for 30 years and along the rest of the road, and it just looks stupid there?
Well, you know, you can make that argument with curbing too, but I think the feeling of the board has always been, we've got to start somewhere. In our situation, if it's a two-lot subdivision and we feel that it isn't appropriate to put sidewalks in, we can wait a week and they ask for a variance, we'll give it to them. We have in the past given it to them. This problem, and plus if somebody needs a variance to build a new house and goes before the Board of Adjustment, they can list it as a variance. The problem comes in is with somebody who's building a house, they don't need any variances, they're not going before any board, and they don't want to put in sidewalks. I understand what you say, what you're saying about, you know, we had sidewalks in the middle of nowhere. But, you know, we did, and then we put sidewalks, the towns put sidewalks all along that street, you know, I mean, the feeling is, you've got to start somewhere. What we tried to do was create a mechanism that was very inexpensive, where they could go to the Board of Adjustment and make their appeal without having to cost them $1,200, you know. And that's when we asked George to write up something recommending, you know, that they be able to go for no fee or $100. You know, basically, a person's going to walk into the Board of Adjustment and say, we don't want to put in sidewalks. Here's our plot plan. You know, here are the houses around us. Nobody has sidewalks. Will you give us a variance for that? And they will or won't. So it was just that mechanism.
So the request is, you know, I know the governing body is looking for our position on you know, a thumbs up or thumbs down on the policy in general, or any recommendation for changes to it. And so we need to answer that question. And we've answered it, I believe. The board's opinion is to keep it the same, keep it the way it is. The question then comes down to the issue of, you know, how much can we shave the fees? I mean, I can list it for $100. But unfortunately, the cost is for work. The cost isn't just an abstract fee. So how are we going to handle that?
Well, does there need to be a legal and a engineering review on something that's specifically sidewalks?
I think that there is some element of engineering review regarding handicap requirements when they do build sidewalk. But we have to be reviewed for that.
No, but I mean, if they're asking to be relieved of that requirement, because that's what they're doing, they're going to ask to be relieved of not putting in a sidewalk. I guess just the initial view of the plot plan to see,
Yeah.
yeah. Maybe we're going out there and looking and seeing.
Yeah, that would be typically handled by the construction department as the final as-built grading plan review. If there's issues with grading, we address that.
I don't know. I mean, the board at the time, you know, a few people disagree, that's something else, but the board at the time felt, you know, it was important for anything that we did, that we put in sidewalks and curbs, and we keep that as a requirement. We deal a lot with commercial and with large subdivisions. And
In terms of the complexity, I would recommend move a motion that effectively allow it to stay the same as it is today, without any change to the fee structure. And If you're looking for a motion, I'll present it.
And that motion is to,
Leave the ordinance as is with the fee structure that is in place currently.
and they can get a relief from that if they are building a house and there's no other sidewalks on there. so
No.
that-
No. They would have, I mean, we pushed for years to get it to that point. And there's a,
I mean, it saves you roads, it saves, how many sidewalks have we put in town for kids to walk into school?
Frank?
It becomes the damn
2006, we spent $350,000 putting in sidewalk.
and before that,
Has it
Yeah,
opened?
not just that I can
Sidewalk
remember.
ordinance always been enforced, because I hear from the people that come in, well, my neighbor put it in a house, he never put it in a sidewalk. So-and-so
Well,
did it,
how old is the ordinance?
I'm not sure.
That's,
we put it in the 80s, I believe.
We're talking new construction.
whether it was ever enforced or not, I understand what you're saying. I know since Mr. May has been zoning officer, it's been enforced. I think his predecessor always enforced it.
Reviewing some case history, there has been a significant number of waivers granted by the zoning board with applications that require variances.
It was enforced back in 1971 when I built my house.
So to answer you,
And he's still mad at it.
it looks like,
Well, that was my first house. I'm still mad at you for the second one.
it looks like the
Has
Board of,
granted several,
the Board of Adjustment has
granted on
granted
that
it.
specific item, the federal application, we had looked at that as well. And that's what I try to explain to people, that these people did go up on the board. It wasn't arbitrarily not inspected, not reviewed.
But how are we gonna overcome the problem that Jim brought up? All right, somebody knocks down a house, they're required to put in a sidewalk. Take my street, Pitney, no one has a sidewalk. So if someone knocks down a house there, puts in a sidewalk, no one else builds a house, we got a sidewalk, no one else does. What does it do for the neighborhood?
The alternative would be, Mayor, the alternative would be for the mayor and council to impose an assessment on all the other homes and put sidewalks in.
Oh, yeah, that happened to me years ago with the curbs, and I wasn't very pleased with it.
That's what Jack went all around in circles.
You know what, I think we're saying that it sounds like we're gonna have a motion that we keep that in there. Mr. Delaney writes in this letter, though, he said, the council is requesting the board provides a recommendation on maintaining, repealing, or amending the ordinance to limit its application to design areas of the community, locations where abutting sidewalks and/or curbs exist, or other criteria as the board may recommend, such as locations where 50% of the properties within 200 feet have curbs and/or sidewalks. So Mr. Delaney's recommend, being a little specific with this. So,
Well, you have to look at the standards that he's suggesting. There may be standards that you want to adopt, but it's going to take a lot more looking into then, because just, if you start talking about 50% within 200 feet or something of that nature, it starts to creep. Where a property that didn't require it does because a house 100 feet away does, and now it does, and it's unmanageable. It changes, and you can't have standards that change. Do you understand? I don't know if I'm being clear, but at some point in time, property which isn't required will be, because houses that are within 200 creep up. So I just see that. I mean, you're changing one problem for another. And then anybody that's required to within 200 feet is not going to be happy either, and they want to come to the board. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if that's the solution. That's all I'm saying.
I'd be more inclined to repeal the whole thing, personally.
the only problem with that is that it now affects everything. And every standard, building standard for the state, every community building standard, what is it?
RSIS,
Yeah,
residential site standard.
all ask for sidewalks and curbs. You've got to have curbs. Curbs should be a non-issue. Otherwise, your streets don't last. You know, the street will start to break up. Plus, what happens is the town winds up eating the cost of putting in the sidewalks where the kids walk to school and stuff like that. So, I appreciate what you're saying. If you feel that strongly, then, you know,
Oh,
you
the
can
side,
make a
there's, we
motion.
have sidewalks along 71 that kids are walking to school that are there. But if a kid is walking on Woodcrest Drive or Pitney or, somewhere where there's not heavy traffic, and they're pretty much walking along the side of the curb anyway, I don't think that's a safety issue until they get to where the crossing guards are on Alair Road or on 71 or on Warren or, down.
I would suggest that the streets, the busyness of the street has increased tenfold since these properties were built. The cars are bigger, the cars are faster. There is a need to get off the street, particularly the first time a child gets hit. It is going to be a disaster. It's going to happen. Building sidewalks and keeping sidewalks. I've been on these boards and closing in on 40 years. And keeping sidewalks and building sidewalks has been a goal of all of those boards to an extent that it's possible. We put sidewalks on Ocean Road, we put sidewalks on Old Mill Road, we put sidewalks on Alair Road, both sides. And keeping an ordinance that's consistent with that practice of getting traffic out of the street and onto the sidewalk, I think is a quality of life issue.
You put sidewalks on.
I agree on busy roads.
Why, we did, yes, we did, in front of your house. I mean, we've assessed where sidewalks weren't, particularly where curbs weren't in there. We've assessed property owners to put curbs in. And the town picked up the bill and billed it back to the particular property owner. We created sidewalks, we reconstructed sidewalks all along the Alair Road. We've been stymied by going north of the park, but other than that, there are a lot of sidewalks have been built in the last 40 years. And to stop that kind of a practice is endangering the future of the quality of life in this property. I would recommend that it is not drastic to believe that the continued practice is going to make life better in something like that.
Frank? Can we get, it seems there's a lot of opinion on both sides of this. I'd sort of like to know what is done in other towns. What have other towns done? What are designs, what is a normal design standard? Are sidewalks required everywhere now? Is it something, I think I'd like that information.
Well, I know that New Jersey resident, well, you can look into them.
Yeah.
The New Jersey
I'll bring back
residential
around
standard,
that
right?
if that's what you want to.
Yeah, I think we need a little more information. I mean, I understand the concerns on both sides. I mean, if I'm sitting there and someone, I'm not doing anything to my home, but someone 150 feet away, knocks down their house, puts up a new house, and all of a sudden I have to put in a sidewalk? What if I'm a senior citizen and, a sidewalk and a curb could cost $20,000, $30,000? I mean, it's a lot of money, isn't it? But on the other hand, I understand the need for consistency in the design standard.
And what if
That's
I
what
want to
you're going
What
for.
if I want to rip out my sidewalk?
Right,
Because I don't want to shovel it. If I don't have a sidewalk, I don't have to shovel it.
right.
And, it becomes a real sticky
It
wicket.
gets a little, but I think.
That's why I think what we tried to do was come up with a method for somebody to appeal it that didn't cost $1,200, where in a specific situation, it didn't make sense, and that the Board of Adjustment would grant it, because they have granted it in the past, So as a general rule, you keep it the way it is, but there are situations where it doesn't make, it's silly, it's a sidewalk to no. I remember looking at one, they had telephone poles where the sidewalk was to go.
That's when they were like that.
Yeah, and no sidewalks on either property next to them. So, obviously it doesn't make sense, but how do you get relief from that? And they should be able to get it relatively inexpensive, but You know, you'd still have to serve people though, wouldn't you?
As long as redress for.
If you were asking for a variance, you'd have to still service people, that costs you a couple $100 there too.
You know, just as an aside, I suppose, see, Springline Kites is not overly expensive to come to the board. And $1,200 is $1,200, I understand that, but other towns are much more expensive than what our fee schedule is. So, I mean, in that sense. I mean, it doesn't change $1,200 from being $1,200, but, you know, we are pretty good as far as charging the residents.
Well, let's, rather than try to come up with a remedy, because it was the one that we came up with, may or may not make sense.
Yeah, reducing the fee.
Pardon me?
You come by
Reducing the fee, streamlining. So we just deal with the issue then?
I don't think reducing the fee really solves the problem. You know, maybe in this particular issue, I don't know if we want to get into that, where you're taking one situation and saying this, but then someone else could come along
Well,
and pay the full fee.
Yeah, you're not reducing the escrow fee.
No.
That's the significant part. Reducing the fee is just $150 or $150, $200 fee. The escrow, I don't believe, George, that's the killer. I mean, that's not what George was recommending.
I understand that. I'm talking about reduction in any fees. You know, you do for one, you have to do for everybody. You know, and I worry that you get into that game, and then it's another complication. So I think we need to take a little more comprehensive look at it.
All right, you want to table
If
this
possible.
until the next meeting, we'll wait and see what other towns are doing and proceed accordingly. Okay. So we'll table it until the next meeting. Sure.
Mr. Chairman, I think that you should announce that the Amoscato matter, if we haven't done that already, is not to be heard tonight.
Yeah, I just, for the general public, the Amoscato application, which was on for tonight, is not going to be on for tonight. Apparently, there was a service question as to them not sending registered letters to certain properties.
They made a mistake, and they used an old list, and new people were on the new list. Lists are good for 6 months. This was older than 6 months. They noticed the problem. It's a deficiency, and it's a procedural, but a very important procedure because it bestows jurisdiction on the board. And without jurisdiction, anything the board would do would be void. It's the easiest appeal from the law.
So that issue will be carried to the next meeting, as that application.
Yeah, they'll have to provide you notice because this notice was
And as far as I know, they haven't withdrawn it. Yeah, we'll take a 10-minute recess. Yeah, they, apparently certain members need to.
Before you take a recess, Mr. Kittrick is here to serve as the board attorney in reference to 1001 Highway 71, Spring Lake Heights LLC, because I have a conflict with that applicant. And he served on that application last month, and with the board's pleasure, if I could be excused before the
Absolutely.
recess.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Recess.